We are going to take you now to the White House, where President Biden is making remarks on Milton. Let's listen.
Teams at the ready for any calls for help this morning. There's still very dangerous conditions in the state, and people should wait to be given an all clear by their leaders before they go out. We know from previous hurricanes that it's often the case that more lives are lost the days following the storm than actually during the storm itself. Vice President Harris and I have been in constant contact with the state and local officials. We're offering everything they need. I must have spoken to somewhere between 10 and 15 mayors and county executives and all the governors. And in fact, starting this morning, we are getting direct assessments from the storm and FEMA from Director Criswell as well. Also, Florida Governor DeSantis, whom I had a chance to speak. And the Vice President and I have just convened a meeting this morning with the leaders of the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense, including NORTHCOM Commander, who has responsibility for providing defense support to civilian authorities. And that apparently is going very well as from the Coast Guard and from FEMA we've received reports. We focused on what the American military can do like no one else can, provide emergency support for communities in need, and we're required by the governor in required by the governor in the affected states. And I've spoken to all the governors, not today all of them, but I've spoken to all of them thus far, and how we can be ready to go in an instant when the call comes. At my direction, the Defense Secretary Austin has provided a range of capabilities both to Florida for Hurricane Milton, as well as the states impacted by Hurricane Helene. And the more capabilities are available, we assess the pressing needs, we can get whatever they need. To the servicemen and women who are on the ground responding to these disasters, thank you. Thank you for your professionalism, your dedication to every mission you're given. You're repeating it again. This is a whole of government effort. It also includes the Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, Department of Health and Human Services, and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is providing mortgage relief for impacted homeowners. As directed, FEMA is going to open disaster recovery centers all across the impacted communities right away. So there's one stop the residents can go to learn about the support they might need, and they'll be advertised where those places are. 3 million people are without power, but more than 40 million power line workers have come from around the country, from Canada to Florida, to restore power across the state. In addition, the Federal Aviation has authorized Florida Power and Light to fly large drones before other manned aircraft can get up in the sky to quickly assess the damage on the ground so ground crews can restore power as quickly as possible. The Coast Guard and the Army Corps of Engineers are assessing how fast they can reopen the Port of Tampa to get fuel, food, water, and other basic goods flowing into the area again and quickly. Additionally, Vice President Harris and I said yesterday, and we'll say it again, to anyone who seeks to take advantage of our fellow Americans' desperation, whether you're a company engaging in price gouging or a citizen trying to scam your neighbors, we will go after you and we will hold you accountable. Now, not only that, our fellow Americans are putting their lives on the line to do this dangerous work and receive death penalties. Some received death penalties yesterday as a result of reckless, irresponsible, relentless disinformation and outright lies that continue to flow. Those who engage in such lies are undermining confidence in the rescue and recovery work that's opening and ongoing. As I speak, they're continuing. These lies are also harmful to those who most need help. Lives are on the line. People are in desperate situations. Have the decency to tell them the truth. So let me say this. To all the people impacted by Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton, despite the misinformation and lies, the truth is we're providing the resources needed to rescue, recover, and rebuild. Let me close with this. I know recovery and rebuilding projects can take a long and difficult time, but as long after the press and the cameras move on, I promise you, you have to pick up the pieces still. I want you to know we'll do everything in our power to help you put pieces back together and get all that you need. But God bless you, and may God bless our troops and our first responders who are some cases risking their lives to help. Thank you very much. I'll be reporting again tomorrow. Thank you.
Mr. President, on FEMA funding, how much time does Congress have to act before FEMA or the SBA run out of money?
That's in discussion now, but I don't want to give you mislead you. I think in terms of the SBA, it's pretty right at the edge right now. And I think the Congress should be coming back and moving on the emergency needs immediately. And they're going to have to come back after the election as well, because this is going to be a long haul for total rebuilding. It's going to take several $1 billion. It's not going to be a matter of just a little bit. But we're providing now to make sure people have the emergency relief they need. The dollars just to be able to get a prescription filled, to get a baby formula done. All the things, that $750 that they're talking about, Mr. Trump and all those other people know it's a lie to suggest that's all they're going to get. That's bizarre. It's bizarre. They got to stop this. They're being so damn un-American with the way they're talking about this stuff. But there's going to be a need for significant amounts of money. We're already underway at trying to calculate what the cost will be, because we don't want to mislead anybody. We want to make sure all the costs are able to be covered.
Have you spoken to Speaker Johnson about coming back before the election to vote?
No, I haven't.
Mr. President, so are you calling on Congress to come back early?
I think Congress should move as rapidly as they can, particularly on the most immediate need, which is small business.
But are you
The Vice President said yesterday that FEMA has what it needs. There's enough resources. That Congress does not need to come back right away.
FEMA has its needs. That's different than SBA.
Okay, so it's SBA. They need to come back and do SBA.
Yeah, but they're going to need a lot more.
Mr. President, what did Prime Minister Netanyahu tell you about his plans relating to retaliation?
He's coming over to help with the storm.
Mr. President, have you spoken with former President Trump at all?
Are you kidding me? Mr. President Trump, former President Trump, get a life, man. Help these people.
Will you hold him accountable? You said you were going to hold those accountable.
Public will hold them accountable. You better than the press hold them accountable, because you know the truth.
Do you plan to speak with former President Trump?
No.
We have been listening to President Biden deliver remarks on the federal response to Hurricane Milton. At the very end there, with blunt words for former President Trump, saying, "Get a life, man," in response to the disinformation that the former president has spread about FEMA and some of the disaster response. I want to bring in right away ABC's Rachel Scott, who is in Detroit, traveling with the former president. We also have ABC's White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks and Jay O'Brien. But Rachel, pretty harsh words from the President Biden to former President Trump. Has Trump backed off at all?
Because the former president is on the stage behind me at this event about the economy, but he still was pushing some false claims about the federal response to the hurricane and the storm. He said that the federal government is not doing enough. We know the former president in recent days has really been pushing this false claim that hurricane victims have only been getting $750 from the federal government. We know that is false. The White House has insisted that that is just an initial amount to help those hurricane victims recover, go to the grocery store, get their immediate needs, and that longer-term help is on the way, and that FEMA officials have been on the ground, National Guard has been on the ground, active duty troops are on the ground as well to help these hurricane victims who are suffering. Still, the former president has been pushing these false claims about it, not backing away from it at all, and that is why you're hearing from President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris telling him to stop playing politics with this moment, stop spreading the misinformation. The president saying once again today that it's causing unnecessary panic, Elizabeth.
Rachel Scott live in Detroit, where former President Trump is speaking just behind her there. Let's go to ABC's Mary Alice Parks. Mary Alice, we heard President Biden also detail the response from federal officials, laying out that this will be a long haul to rescue, recover, and rebuild. Did he sound that the federal response is prepared? Kind of give us the play-by-play of what is actually underway right now when it comes to the response to Milton on the ground from what we heard from the president?
Yeah, you heard him talk, Elizabeth, about all the calls that he's been having with local officials there on the ground, making sure that the federal government was responding to needs, that they are still doing a damage assessment, that local officials are trying to figure out where the direct needs are. He talked about how FEMA will be setting up local neighborhood response centers so people can come and apply for more aid. But right now, the focus remains on search and recovery. We know that there's about 8,000 federal personnel that have been on the ground in the region. That includes about 1,500 search and rescue folks of the National Guard. He talked specifically about the work that the military is doing, his conversations with DOD to make sure that the Coast Guard and other sort of branches of the Pentagon are really making a point of supporting civilian search and rescue as well, that they bring an expertise in this moment that is really necessary and important. I mean, look, the president wants to make sure that people feel like the federal government is there and responding to the needs as they figure out what exactly those needs could be. And he said, you know, one of the big concerns is that often lives are lost in the days after a hurricane. Of course, concerns about all of that standing water, concerns about potable water, concerns about people's safety as they try to return home. But wow, Elizabeth, what a moment there at the end. That was really something when he looked straight into the camera and said that the former president needed to knock it off. He said, help these people. You know, one of the biggest concerns out of this White House right now is that people will believe they aren't entitled to help or that they can't get help, that they can't get more aid. You heard President Biden say that it's just bizarre to spread a lie, he called it, that people are only going to get $750. He said that's immediate relief, but people can apply and get significantly more, often in the tens of thousands of dollars to help rebuild their homes and recover. And they want to make sure people know and are getting that assistance that they are entitled to, Elizabeth.
Right, and President Biden's delivery so clear, though, when he was asked, have you spoken to former President Trump? He chuckled, but then he looked straight at the camera. Jay O'Brien, also want to get your thoughts. We heard President Biden call on Congress to come back now because of the need for funding for the Small Business Administration. There are a lot of concerns about funding for FEMA. Is there a realistic possibility that lawmakers do come back early to get some of this relief package passed before the election now, less than a month away?
And it doesn't look like it. We've seen some resistance from congressional leadership, and then some members of Congress say, look, we would come back, but we don't know if the full request would even be ready for us to process and vote on. What the president tried to do there was somewhat separate the need. He said, the request is ready right now for the SBA, the Small Business Administration. Congress should come back and deal with that because the SBA has a lot of tasks it needs to do in the aftermath of a storm like this to help small business owners. And then FEMA needs funding too, the president says. I'm paraphrasing him. But Congress can tackle that in theory, as Secretary Mayorkas also said earlier today, when they return in mid-November after the election. And if there's another storm between now and then, FEMA would rely on money it already has in its bank account and maybe pull from existing more long-term programs, try to make ends meet for that storm, and then get that congressional appropriation when Congress comes back. All of it looking more likely, though, Congress is going to deal with it when they come back in mid-November, both FEMA and the SBA. One more thing to point out, though, when it comes to this misinformation, when former President Trump and others say that you only qualify or you only get $750 or fewer in that initial interview with FEMA, it's worth pointing out some people don't necessarily understand the difference. FEMA gives you a check for $750. That is true. And then what they do typically is they come to your home, they conduct an inspection, they assess the damage to your home or to your business or wherever you're applying for disaster relief funds, and then either the SBA if it's your business or FEMA if it's your home, cut you a check for the damage that you have incurred. And that's the confusion, right? Storm recovery is messy, it's confusing. You get one check and then you have to wait months or weeks or whatever for another one. That's where this misinformation is growing here, Elizabeth, in the confusion, in the messiness of disaster recovery.